The deaf woman's interpreter was apprehended. The courtroom was filled with disbelief as Judge Caprio announced their arrest. She also made a statement, saying, "I'm not the same." Mara Vega was seated at the defense table. Her gaze widened as she contemplated the surroundings. Confidence flooded her face. She signed again with urgency. There was no response. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his bench and spotted the question in her body language. Despite his inability to read the signs, he turned to the clerk. "Miss Reyes, where is the interpreter?" She checked her notes. Her voice was hesitant. "The interpreter is currently unavailable, and the note indicates that she is in custody." Caprio sat down slowly, indicating that everything was coming to an end. He stated that the interpreter in custody is the one who should be able to provide this woman with her constitutional right to understand these proceedings. Miss Reyes nodded and expressed her gratitude. According to the report, Caprio was apprehended last night and put them on the bench with the same precision as a man who had just discovered an injustice. What was the reason for her arrest? Miss Reyes was charged with obstructing a police officer. The room was quiet. Caprio leaned forward. His voice was composed and restrained, but there was a layer of force. The interpreter, who was supposed to ensure the defendant's communication with law enforcement, was arrested for obstruction while attempting to do so. No one answered. Once again, Marisol's hands were in motion. She was asking questions that no one else could answer. Her dissatisfaction was evident and she was completely isolated. Caprio looked at her, the gallery, and Officer D'Angelo with a baffled expression. "Prior to witnessing anything that comes after this, please state your standing and subscribe to the court's order." Miss Reyes stood while Miss Caprio's time was 9 hours, 45 minutes and 12 seconds, with an unavailable interpreter and a reason in custody. Her voice was formal, but there was discomfort in it. Case number 2025 CR 4417, State versus Marisol Vega, 4 counts. Deficiency of lawful directives, opposing arrest, unwillingness to drive, missed court appearance. Caprio lifted a hand as the clerk paused and observed Marisol. He spoke slowly, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Miss Vega, what's up?" Marisol shook her head. She signed once more. Her hands swung back and forth with care, leaving Caprio to face the clerk. "Is there anyone in the courtroom who speaks American Sign Language?" He glanced at the prosecutor. "Is there an interpreter in your office?" The prosecuting officer hesitated. "Your Honor, it's not right now." Caprio's demeanor remained the same, but his voice shifted to a more hushed tone. "We cannot proceed until everything is equal." He returned to Miss Reyes. "I need to obtain the file for the interpreter's arrest and ask why Naomi Clarke is still in jail." Miss Reyes quickly typed and then read from the screen. Following a traffic stop with the defendant, interpreter Naomi Clarke was taken into custody around 8:47 p.m. yesterday evening. According to arresting officer Daniel Kim, Miss Clarke refused to return to the scene and was charged with obstruction. Caprio's mouth tightened. As he spoke, a woman who was deaf was being held captive. Miss Reyes nodded in agreement. The interpreter was detained overnight after reading a jail log, and Caprio opened the file. He read quietly and then glanced upwards. It's worth noting that Miss Vega was pulled over. The woman's profound deafness prompted her to seek the assistance of an interpreter. The interpreters arrived and were subsequently apprehended by the officer for carrying out their responsibilities. The prosecutor took a stand. "The officer's report reveals, Your Honor." Caprio stated that he doesn't care what the law requires. The Americans with Disabilities Act mandates that a deaf person be granted meaningful access to communicate with law enforcement during any encounter. He sought assistance from Officer D'Angelo. "Please join Officer Kim in this courtroom." Marisol's hands were moved again, and she was asking what was happening. There was no one available to answer her. The loneliness intensified. Caprio glanced at her. His voice was softer now, even though she couldn't hear it. "Miss Vega, I'll ensure that you comprehend all that occurs here." He made a commitment to contact Miss Reyes and ask for Naomi Clarke's immediate release. "My intention is to have the prosecutor's office review her obstruction charge within the next hour, and I am also interested in receiving a complete explanation of why someone was arrested for interpreting." Miss Reyes nodded and answered the phone. Caprio leaned back. He re-examined the case file and analyzed the custody logs and jail transcripts, with the narrator recounting Naomi's words in the official record while she was still in a cell. She asserted that Marisol needed to learn ASL. She mentioned to the officers that she was incapable of comprehending verbal commands. According to her, she had reached for a laminated card that said, "I am deaf in English and Spanish." She asked them to wait and let them interpret her message. She urged them to comply with the law. The officers advised her to cease interfering. According to one officer, her signature was causing difficulty, while another officer believed she was creating a disturbance. She was warned by a third person that she would be arrested if she didn't comply. She continued to sign and interpret documents. She persisted in asserting her rights and was taken into custody. Marisol was confined to a holding cell overnight, unable to communicate with anyone. She signed to the walls. She gave her signature to both the officers and other detainees, but no one understood it. She wept and then signed and cried even more. The interpreter was taken away. Consistent requests. The courtroom door was opened. Officer Daniel Kim, who was in his early 30s and dressed in uniform, entered with a small notebook. He made his way to the witness stand. The clerk swore him in. Caprio's voice was composed. "Officer Kim, let me know what happened on November 3rd in court." Kim opened his notebook. His voice was composed and professional. "At 8:21 p.m., I observed a vehicle traveling 48 mph in the 35 zoning area. I pulled over after 2 blocks. As I approached the driver's side, I identified myself and asked for my license and registration. The driver did not acknowledge me. I repeated the request, but she remained unresponsive and appeared to be ignoring me. I raised my voice. She made her way towards the glove compartment. I instructed her to stop and show her hands, but she didn't oblige. Hence, I opened the door and tried to protect her. I called for assistance as she ducked behind the wheel. Did the driver make any comments? "Honor, I'm sorry, she didn't say anything. Did she make any gestures?" Kim paused. Caprio mentioned that she was moving her hands, but I'm not sure how she did it. "Did you detect any indication of gestures or hand movements in the sign language?" Kim's face appeared to be reddish. Caprio's voice remained composed. "What happened next?" An interpreter arrived. She mentioned that someone had called her. When she got into the car, she began to use the same hand movements. I suggested that she withdraw, but she turned down the request. She stated that the driver was deaf and required an interpreter. I advised her to complete the stop first, but she argued that I couldn't ask the driver for an interpreter. She persisted, indicating that she was not following my instructions. I apprehended her for obstructing, and Caprio's voice remained silent until he spoke, indicating that failure cannot be considered defiance. Kim looked down. It wasn't until the interpreter informed me that she was deaf. "What actions did you take?" I requested her to step back and complete the intermission. "Did you make an official request for an interpreter?" "No, sorry. I had the impression that I could have handled it by detaining them." However, Kim didn't provide a response. "Is there any ADA-specific documentation in the body cam footage that showed a 7-hour, 18-minute, and 4-second time difference between the officer signing and Caprio turning to Miss Reyes?" After opening a folder, Miss Riz read aloud, "Yes, I honor you." Miss Vega had submitted an ASL interpreter request form 2 months prior to the parking ticket. The form was forwarded to the court clerk's office, the traffic division, and the prosecutor. It comprised her contact information, her interpreter's contact details, and a request that all future communications include ASL access. The system knew what the information was, but it ignored the notice given by Caprio. Miss Reyes stated that the interpreter's agency had sent 3 emails requesting confirmation of providing an interpreter for any court appearances or law enforcement needs, but no response was received. Caprio turned her back. She proceeded to another page. The interpreter's agency received a transcript from the jail supervisor that was left at 11:03 p.m. on November 3rd. It contains the statement, "We do not pay for interpretation services at night." The room became cold, and Caprio's voice was soft and precise. "Rights are not a matter of budget." He turned to the prosecutor. "Is there a position in your office regarding this?" Prosecutor was present. His voice was not clear. The department is currently reviewing the procedures as per Caprio's request. A woman was arrested for being deaf. An interpreter was apprehended for interpreting, and the system is reviewing procedures. He leaned forward. If you believe accessibility is a right, don't be reluctant to subscribe to the court order. Ada Code Summary Line. It is necessary to have interpreters present before questioning begins. The courtroom door opened again, and Naomi Clarke was escorted in by Officer D'Angelo. She appeared exhausted. Despite her clothes being creased from a night of holding, her demeanor was unwavering and professional. Caprio stood up for the first time in the courtroom. "Miss Clarke," he apologized for any offense caused. "The wrongdoing inflicted on you was unacceptable. What happened to Miss Vega is unacceptable, and I am committed to preventing it from happening again." Naomi nodded. Caprio made a brief appearance on the witness stand. The clerk escorted her to the stand and confirmed her testimony. Marisol's face was filled with relief as she signed, and her hands moved quickly. Naomi has inquired about the situation, whether she will be incarcerated, and why she has not been approached by anyone. Caprio's voice was composed. "Inform her that she won't go to jail. Make sure she comprehends everything from this point on." Naomi sighed. Marisol's shoulders became tense. Caprio glanced at Naomi. "Miss Clarke, tell the court about the incident on November 3rd, and her voice remained steady. "A bystander contacted me and informed me that a woman who was deaf was being stopped by the police and couldn't communicate. I drove to the location where Officer Kim was yelling at Miss Vega, stating that she was not hearing. She was grabbing a card in her glove compartment that explains her disability. He thought she was reaching for something. She paused. I approached. I professed to be an ASL certified interpreter when I informed her that she was deaf and unable to hear his instructions. He instructed me to take a step back. I explained that it was necessary for her to seek an interpretive expert to clarify the situation. I was accused of interfering, and I stated that the ADA mandates the presence of an interpreter. He cautioned me that he would be taken into custody if I didn't. I argued that she lacked the ability to communicate with me independently. I was apprehended by him, with Caprio's gaze directing towards Officer Kim. Is that accurate? Kim gave a nod and acknowledged her honor. When Miss Clarke inquired about the ADA, she hesitated. I stated that her signing was causing a thaw in the room, and it took 5 seconds. Then it went away. 7, 10, 12 seconds in all. The courtroom was filled with the sound of ignorance, and Caprio's voice became more subdued and sharper during the hearing. The time period of 10 hours, 13 minutes, and 48 seconds is a form of communication, as recognized by a M court. After opening the file once more, Caprio began reading silently, as evidenced by the evidence. Miss Vega, who is extremely deaf, was pulled over for a minor traffic violation after submitting her ADA request form 2 months ago, but the system did not acknowledge her disability. The officer's commands were inaudible to her. She endeavored to communicate through sign language and identification, but the officer misunderstood her actions. An interpreter arrived to grant her legal access. The interpreter was apprehended by the officer for granting him access. Miss Vega spent the night in detention without any means of communication. The jail refused to provide an interpretation service because it was after hours. He closed the file. All of those actions were in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and went against Miss Vega's constitutional rights. He looked at Marisol and interpreted Naomi as he spoke. Miss Vega, your charges have been dismissed, and your arrest record will be deemed invalid. You will receive a written apology from this court and from the Providence Police Department, along with payment for interpreter fees that were expected to be paid at the time of your stop and during your detention. Marisol shook her hands. Naomi retorted, wondering if she had made a mistake. Caprio's voice remained soft. Reject her by stating that the system had failed her and pledged to ensure that it didn't fail anyone else. He then asked Officer Kim to complete a 40-hour ADA compliance training program. Your plan is to provide a written report on disability rights in law enforcement and to apologize personally to Miss Vega and Miss Clarke. Kim acknowledged the honor. Caprio turned to the prosecutor. Your office stated that they would review the obstruction charge against Miss Clarke. I anticipate it to be dismissed within 24 hours and that she will also receive compensation for her unlawful detention. He looked at Miss Reyes. This court will implement the following policies immediately. First, a 24-hour ASL interpreter hotline will be established for all law enforcement interactions. Second, every Providence Police Department officer will complete mandatory disability awareness training within 60 days. And third, to ensure that all detainees are appropriately accommodated when they are released from custody. Within 48 hours, the ADA request form submitted to this court will be flagged and confirmed, documenting and correcting the ledger of violations. Caprio leaned forward. Disability is not a form of defiance. Silence is not a form of resistance. It may be an unfamiliar language. Miss Reyes, please report fully on this case. My request is for it to be dispatched to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, with the aim of obtaining details about the incident and our efforts to resolve it. Miss Reyes nodded. Yes, Honor. Caprio went back to Naomi. Miss Clarke, thank you for standing up for Miss Vega. Your bravery and willingness to obey the law resulted in a one-night stand. I apologize for the inconvenience, and the court is appreciative of your efforts. Naomi provided a signed petition to Marisol. With a soft voice, Naomi expresses gratitude and assumes that nobody would listen, while Caprio gazes at Marisol. Is it necessary for police departments to provide disability training after listening to the court, and ensuring that the system will also take into account her concerns? Scroll down to read the announcement memo. All court notices will now provide ADA accommodation instructions in ASL video format. Caprio lifted his hand as the hearing neared its conclusion. Miss Clarke, I have an additional question to answer. Naomi glanced upwards. Could you please instruct me on 2 signs? I'd like to speak directly to Miss Vega. The courtroom did not move. Naomi left the witness stand. She moved towards the bench. She displayed 2 signs. Caprio kept a close eye on the situation, practicing once and twice before nodding and looking up at Marisol. He raised his hands. He signed with care, but I'm sorry. Marisol was teary-eyed. Caprio signed again. Marisol expressed her gratitude by signing back. Her hands moved in a manner that was effortless. She placed her hand over her heart. With a slight tilt of her head, Naomi's voice reverberated. Caprio nodded in agreement. She had a voice, but we didn't. Justice remained silent. Caprio glanced at the gallery. If you think justice should be available for everyone, sign up to the court order and be warned. The Providence Police Department initiated a disability rights training program 3 weeks later, which resulted in Officer Kim being one of the first graduates. The final essay he wrote was titled The Language I Didn't Know. The 24-hour ASL interpreter hotline received 32 calls in its initial month. 32 individuals who would have been arrested for noncompliance were given the communication access they required. Naomi Clarke's obstruction charge was dismissed with prejudice. The city issued an official apology. She was granted full compensation for her arrest and lost wages. Marisol Vega's arrest record was expunged, and she was personally apologized by the police chief. Additionally, she was contacted by the mayor, who expressed gratitude for identifying the deficiencies in the system. The court reworked its ADA request forms, which were now accessible in ASL video format, large print, Braille, and 15 written languages. Each submission triggered an automatic confirmation and a follow-up call. Caprio's report was used by the Department of Justice as a model case study for ADA compliance in municipal courts across the country. A note card was kept on his desk by Judge Caprio, stating that silence is not resistance. Every morning before the court began, he looked at it and saw a small American Sign Language sign on the wall behind his bench, which said, "Justice for all." This was done to demonstrate the importance of storytelling and education, not for legal reasons or reporting. The sign was made for education and entertaining purposes.